Welcome to the Planner Pals podcast, a podcast hosted by two true Planner Pals. I am Jess or Jessie Curran.
And my name is Mark, and I go by Mark Your Pages. We are your Planner Pals favorite podcast. I stole that from somebody. Can you guess who I stole that from?
Certainly not me, because that is like a mouthful that I'm not going to be able to say.
We'll let our Planner Pals decide where that one came from. But first of all, we just wanted to thank you all for all of your great comments on the last podcast talking about our stacks for 2025. I have to tell you just how many people messaged me and were like, I love that you left in the part where you tried to cut Jess off and stop her. And I was like, I literally didn't think there could have been any more notebooks you could have had in your stack. I swear.
My feelings. I'm just like, excuse me, bish. I am not done here. You cannot silence me. I'm just like, the everyday journal is like the most important journal. It needs to get mentioned last.
I mean, I don't know how you don't start with that journal. You're like, let me talk about all these little obscure ones I have everywhere, not the most important one for your entire day.
You don't start with the boring one that everybody has. You always go in with all of the other things that are like, people like, oh, what's that? Do I need one of these? Do I need a lineup that's 11 journals deep?
I mean, I definitely thought that throughout. I know a few other comments on the video too. They were like, wow, listening to Jess makes me feel like I'm not doing enough. I was like, well, Jess is special. She's tracking. It's her life now. This is your life. You have to have all this fun stuff.
Exactly. Everything is content. Everything is content. Like if I was not a content creator, I probably wouldn't have quite as many, but they do have, their own unique functions and they do help me get organized in different areas of my life. So the lineup would probably be a little bit smaller, maybe less R&D notebooks, but I still like to have a big stack.
No, it definitely is a good one. And it perfectly feeds into our topic today because we're going to be talking about notebooks specifically. Jess, why don't you go and tell all of our Planner Pals where we'll be focusing our time?
So as people who have quite a few notebooks, if you haven't noticed already, we do find that there are some things that are kind of make or breaks, things that kind of say, yes, I'm going to get this. This is going to be one that I add to my stash, and ones that rule the notebooks out completely. So thinking about our planning must-haves when it comes to a new notebook, what are those things? Do we differ on any of our opinions? I'm eager to get your thoughts on this, Mark, but what would be like the first of your must-haves when it comes to a new notebook?
Absolutely. Well, the first thing I do is I 100% judge a book by its cover. When it comes to my notebooks and my planners and everything else, I want something that looks good. I will say that has changed and have upgraded a little bit over time. When I first started, I was just like, what's the cheapest thing out there? I don't care what the cover is. I think I even had like a pink glittery one at one point I got from like a dollar bin at a craft store, just because it was like, I don't know anything just yet. But as I started to learn more about the paper and the notebook and the makes and the brands and the quality, it really has made a big difference. And I think for me personally, the covers really help show your personality. And especially if it's something that you're carrying around with you, if you go to work or even if you're at home, in our case, taking pictures of our notebooks and talking about them, there has to be something that you're excited about. And I definitely think the covers and the quality of them are very cool. So I would just say for myself, Archer and Olive has been one that I've been a big fan of over the years. I think when I first started collecting their notebooks and using their notebooks, I was the plain Jane. But this also was before they started putting out more masculine, less designerly, less floral, not things that I'm necessarily looking at. I want to be careful around this because when I start describing journals with like gender themes, people get upset. I also don't personally like to do that, but it's just like the thing that we've always kind of known. Like I just don't really prefer a more feminine, floral kind of cover. And earlier when Archer and Olive was doing that, that was kind of their thing. So I would go for their just blank journals that were blue or black or whatever. But now the Halloween one they just came out with like the red moon and the bats, like that's the kind of stuff I'm looking for. That's why I think I love their Halloween collections so much.
No, that's very fair. I think their Halloween collections are always one to look out for. I have been really enjoying their full cover designs. I am completely a sucker for full cover designs. The one thing that I've started really paying attention to, weirdly, is spine design. Just getting very excited about the idea of like, oh, you spent time, effort, and energy to decorate the spine of the notebook, because when you display it on the shelf, most of the time that's kind of what you see. So it is nice to have some decoration there. I wouldn't say it's necessarily like a make or break, like, oh God, I'm only going to buy your notebook if it has spine design, but it is very much a nice to have. I was very much like you as well. Started off in my kind of notebook journey and being like very plain Jane, as you said. I like the simple colors, just one standard color, no kind of iconography on the front or anything like that. It was only when I guess getting introduced to Archer and Olive, I think my first journal from them was a black linen cover with the crescent moon design with the little stars, and I'm like, I'm a sucker for stars and sparkles, and it was kind of like simple enough that I could trick myself into thinking like, this is fine, it's only a little bit of decoration. It's not going to be too like gaudy or out there or anything. Since then, yeah, nope. I much more prefer having notebooks that do have those full cover designs. I think the artistry that goes into it is just so gorgeous. Having said that, though, I'm not just going to get a notebook because it has a full cover design. I am a bit of a persnickety biscuit with this. I think that that's fine when you've got as many notebooks as we have. It does pay to have some points that you're a little bit more picky on. Otherwise, your house gets overrun with notebooks and then your partner leaves you and says, nope, it's me all the notebooks and all this.
Your partner sets up a stack of notebooks and they stand on the other side of the room and you have to choose. You're like, I mean, can I take a handful of notebooks over with you, or is it all or nothing here?
Yeah, I know, right? It's like an intervention. They pull the banner down. It's just like, you need to stop.
It's just like the letter, like, Jess, I'm very worried about your lifestyle that you've chosen for yourself. You've spent absorbent amounts of money on paper. Think about our family first.
I think that's the thing, because every so often Vogel and I will have a conversation about, finances and stuff, running a household, whatever. And he'll be like, oh, I don't know, how much did you spend on notebooks? I'm like, haha, like nothing, because that's the thing. We work with a lot of brands that do send us free product. So yes, I have quite a few notebooks, but in terms of how much I spent on them, significantly less than I think people would probably assume.
And it's been something I pay attention to now whenever I'm looking at different notebooks, whether again it's a brand that we're working with or not. When you're a creator and a content creator and people do want to send you stuff, I do pay attention to that. I don't just like accept anything. If it really doesn't fit into my general aesthetic, which is kind of all over the place, but if it's like overly one way or the other, I just don't want to have to like start a video and be like, here's this ultra floral design that I would never ever use just to be like, oh, I have a notebook. I definitely pay attention to the style, the design. That's really important to me. And even when I was designing the notebook for Archer and Olive that I did earlier this year, I mean, I spent a lot of time. I did a whole video talking about like all the different directions that I could have went with it. But I think the cover is such an important part of a notebook, like I said, to really show off your personality. And not just Archer and Olive, but other brands are doing a lot of really cool things to the notebook covers now too. I was looking back through some of my collection as well, and I have one that had almost like a cushy cover a little bit. It was like a really cool, like botanical, had a lot of like succulents and monsteras on it, but it was like a cushy cover. I don't know what else to really call it, but I was like, this was really cool. This was something a little bit different in that tactileness of it. Or again, if something's raised or if it's embossed or debossed, like that just is really awesome to me.
Oh, that good point about the tactile thing, because there are certain cover materials that I just prefer not to have. Any of the covers that have like fluffy covers on them, I just feel like it's a dust trap. I don't want a ShamWow as a notebook, but like
I think I might know what notebooks you're talking about.
Yeah, but it seems to be becoming more common as well because, we had a certain brand that was producing them and now I'm seeing a couple more pop up. That's really not my preferred. I know that some people have real issues with the velvet style covers, like just the feel of them gives them the ick, which is fair. I don't necessarily get the ick from it, but it's not my preferred because it will pick up dust, it will get dirty and start looking a little manky. I don't really want my journal to look manky. I'm also kind of picky with different types of the vegan leather. I like to call it faux leather. Vegan leather sounds poncy.
I mean, that's the purpose, especially with the luxury brand. At least like Archer and Olive is always saying that. And people are like, that's not faux leather. That's plasticide. And I'm like, it's whatever. It's not actual real leather. Calm it down.
I think that just having the different types of faux leather as well is also kind of a bit tricky because some of them are a little bit hit and miss. Some of them do hold up quite well to, increase amounts of use. Whereas some of them, it's like, oh, I opened this notebook twice and now it's kind of like ripping at the seams a little bit.
Oh, I also know what notebook you're talking about as well, because we both have that notebook and both of the covers are. It's the only notebook I have that the notebook cover is falling off. I know what you're saying. I also am not a huge fan now of the old linen covers from Archer and Olive because they are so grimy. Or what word did you use about it? I liked your word better.
What, Mankey?
Manky. Yes, Manky. That's such a good dude. They're so manky. And I was doing something the other day when I was recording and I pulled out one of my very first square notebook and it's just not very nice on the covers or where you touch it all the time. I love the new like Berkram. I love the faux leather because they don't get like that. And my fingers get grimy and it just discolors because of that. I don't know if they have dirty hands. It's just like the oils on your hands even were transferring. So that's why now, as I'm taking a look at everything, I do pay attention to it. Now I actually ask, like, what is the cover made out of? Because I don't want to have a notebook with all my manky fingerprints all over it.
Yeah, I have one notebook that was a linen cover, and I don't even know how it happened, but it has a food stain on the back of it. What was I eating? Where was I eating? You don't leave my desk. So
Yeah.
it was a little odd, but especially on those kind of like paler colored notebooks, which is usually not what I tend towards anyways. And that's why this notebook in particular got used as an R&D journal, because I'm like, I still want to use you. It's just that I'm not going to use you for my everyday carry type deal. But those ones, they tend to get kind of like grayish around the outside as like, you do pencil erasings or whatever, and it just kind of like scuffs around on your desk and whatnot. You don't even need to be a particularly messy person, but it just kind of happens. But what would be your next big consideration, your next kind of must have for a new notebook?
Yeah, so it's similar type of ideas that I've come to learn about different notebooks is the type of paper that is in those notebooks. So again, when I was buying that dollar bin paper, I had no idea what that meant. And it was like you would write with a regular gel pen on there and it would just like bleed through 6 pages. Like it was just, I don't even know why they make those notebooks. There is no point in those notebooks. But over time, I definitely have learned a lot about it. I can understand, there could be a lower GSM paper and still handle products very well. I think about like Tomo River paper is always people are always talking about. And it was just like, yeah, that holds on to ink and all really well, but that is paper thin. Like there is paper thin paper. You can only really write on one side of that type of page. So for me, going from something like a Leuchtturm, which I don't know what Leuchtturms are, if they're 70, 75, or 80 GSM.
I think they were 80 and they now sell 120 as well. So it depends on which one you get. We probably use the 80 though.
Yeah, the very first ones that we got were before I even knew what any of that was. And then I think all of them now are 120, or at least the bulletjournal.com Leuchtturms that they partner with. I know are all 120 now too. But to be very honest with you, I don't see a huge difference between the original Leuchtturm and the 120. Maybe with a handful of pens, but honestly, I don't. And the ghosting for me is just a no-no. I can't help it. I think we were talking about that on a previous episode. Like I get the ick whenever I see it where I don't want to see it. Again, if I'm buying, a Hobonichi or Night Owl Planner or something like that, I know what I'm going to expect from that because I know the type of paper. But for a regular journal I'm using all the time, I just need something thicker. And the 160 GSM from Archer and Olive has always worked well for me for the different things I'm throwing at it. But now I'm starting to pay a little bit more attention to if it's coated paper or if it's not, because now that I'm including fountain pens more, that does make a difference. And also, I know it doesn't always have to be 160 GSM to still be good paper, because I know there are other types of like lower GSMs, but they're just made differently. That's the other thing too, Jess. Like I didn't know how many different paper types there were until you start looking into different type of notebooks and companies and papers and stuff like that. And it gets kind of wild. So for me, it's becoming really important to make sure that my paper can hold on to the materials that I'm actually using now. And after bullet journaling since 2017, I know the products that I like to use. I know what I'm going to use in it. And therefore, I don't have to worry too much about like, well, what if I want to use an alcohol marker? I know you don't do that in any type of paper now. So it's not a problem to be like, let's test to see if it works. It doesn't work. Can it handle fountain pen ink? And can it handle mild liners? And every now and again, like a highlighter or maybe watercolor if I'm feeling fancy.
Yeah, I think that paper considerations, it's always like, what are you actually going to be using in here? Because like you said, if you want to use your fountain pens, then something coated is probably going to be better. I don't use fountain pens, so I don't really give a toss. But if you're doing watercoloring, it also can be nice to use some coated paper because then it doesn't sink into the page so readily. It means you have time to like blend colors and stuff like that. So for me, I kind of, like you said, very kind of set in my ways when it comes to which materials I do tend to use. And I find that 160 GSM does work quite well for that. Uncoated paper means my pens dry faster. So I have come to appreciate that. I can't with ghosting. I really can't. But I think that's mainly because I make content. So it's like when I was, taking pictures for Instagram or whatever and first trying to like make my videos and stuff, you don't really want to see through to the other side of the page because you want to show what you're working on the current spread. So that was kind of one of the deciding factors for me moving away from the LT 1917s because I just could not get over the fact that everything would show through to the other side. If I was just using black pen in a notebook, I'd probably be fine with it. But because I do like to do, a bit of decoration with Tombos or like second line highlights or whatever and stuff like that, I like it to be decorative, I like it to be pretty, and I don't want to see kind of like duplicates of these different designs that I've put in the notebook. I think a big consideration for me is going to be like not necessarily like the type of the paper, but what's actually printed onto the paper. I like my dot grid. I don't use lined notebooks. I needed to have the dots though, so I have some kind of reference. Otherwise, everything would be very skew with cattywampus. Like, can you imagine trying to rule up a calendar grid without any dot references?
I did it one time. I was experimenting with a line journal to see if I could make it work. And essentially what I ended up doing was just making tick marks with the ruler to like break it down into like millimeters anyway. But I was like, well, let's see if he could do this. And I was like, this is not worth it. I could not draw a straight line for the life of me. Even though I was lining things up, it wasn't a good experience for me. I was like, I'm going to have to print out a dot grid essentially to paste inside of here to use, or just don't use that type of notebook.
Yeah, I think like it's certainly doable, but the amount of time, effort, energy that is then spent like just trying to set up a calendar, I'm like, nah, I'm gonna do the dot grid because then you've got your vertical reference and your horizontal reference, but it's not so like in your face that you can't do kind of like doodles, decorations over the top. I guess that's also another consideration is what do the dots actually look like? There have been some notebooks that I've gotten which I certainly will not purchase again because the dots are either like they're too big or they're too small or they're too dark or they're too faint or like it's very much like the Goldilocks dot. Where's that at?
Well, yeah, when you buy an off-brand notebook, I have a pocket notebook that was like that, and I looked at it and I was like, there are maybe 6 squares on this piece of paper because they were so big and so spaced out. I was like, there is no point to this. I do have a question for you, though, about the dot grid or the grid. Have you ever used a notebook or know of brands that have the line grid? Because I'm interested in trying that as like a full-time notebook, not as like I think Hobonichi does that. A lot of the Tomo River paper, at least the planners we get, have the line grid. But have you seen any like more like, it's not a bullet journal unless you're doing the bullet journal method. I know that, but do other brands do that?
I know that Scribbles the Matter does. I'm currently using this, Kokuyo or whatever. This is a scribble book, though. This isn't like a proper bullet journal. But Scribbles That Matter, I think, does do a grid notebook, except they don't ship to New Zealand. So,
oh. Oh, you know who else does? Actually, I was just thinking about that. I don't know if I think they're still around. Dingbats also does a grid one. I think I tried out one of theirs.
Nice. Yeah, the thing that I have with Dingbats, and this is not like an actual issue because like I'm all for Dingbats and the like reasoning behind their brand and all of this kind of thing. It's just that their papers aren't bright white. And that's another consideration that I have for the paper because I want my inks to show up in their kind of like truest color. So if I don't have bright white, then it always ends up being like a little bit more like tinted or it just feels a little more subdued because you don't have that kind of like punchy contrast between your like bright colors and the white or very like dark black and the white.
I feel that way with the craft paper notebooks. As much as I absolutely love the way things look on there, you do have to almost expect it to look totally different. Especially I was using colored pencils for a while. I got into for like a hot second, and I was using them inside of there to do something. And I was like, and I'm already color deficient as is. And then they added like this warm hue to it. And I was like, I don't even know what is this color? It looks totally different, but you have to kind of expect it. I do love the way things look on craft paper though, but I've never used a craft paper notebook as a full-time notebook. It's always been like an R&D journal. Same thing for a blackout as well. I think it looks cool for fun projects, but I haven't. I think, didn't Erica one time craftinated, didn't she use a blackout notebook for a whole year?
I'm not sure. I know Erin Floto used like one for 6 months, like an on-off type thing. And I know that Savannah Scribbles has been using a blackout and her work is, oh my God, so beautiful. Like I was actually quite tempted to try a Neapolitan again for next year, but I know in my heart of hearts, the blackout paper is not what I should be working on, but I still want to experiment with it.
Well, I feel like you being at home though and working though, you have a little bit more opportunity to make sure you have the materials that you need. And I do too. I mean, working remote, technically I have all the materials here that could use it, but I just think that if you are on the go or if you have to go into the office, you just have to be so prepared, because if you're using the Neapolitan and you just have to flip to the next available page and you're on a white page and the next available one is tan or black, it's like, well, do I have the right pen to be able to write on this paper? And if you don't, you're kind of screwed.
Yeah, I just find that like the dry time for gel pens in general, and not like gel ink pens, but I'm thinking like, Jelly Roll, like, colored pop thing, whatever. The dry time for that, and then also the transfer that I was getting, just, the heebie jeebies. I do not like it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I didn't think about that for the blackout paper. It does transfer a lot.
Yeah, and then you just, again, it's effectively like a ghosting 2.0. It's like you're not seeing through the page, you're just seeing a transfer of what was on one side to the other. And I'm like, no, 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 no. I drew out my design. I don't want all this extra stuff all over it, but no.
What is that, like an opaque transfer, like an opaque ghosting?
Either way, it's not something I want in my notebook. So yeah, I want to make sure that my paper, bright white, so that I can use the pens that I want to. It's not going to do any transfer. It's not going to do any ghosting or bleeding, and it has dots that just make sense. I think another one for me, like kind of a must-have more than just a nice-to-have, would be an elastic closure. Like, I don't have a tendency to use bookmarks. Oftentimes they get like caught under my foot when I'm sitting cross-legged on the couch and I end up ripping them out accidentally. Okay, as a side note, that happened in the one notebook that I actually used the bookmark in. Devastato, but it is what it is. But no, in terms of the bookmarks, I don't really typically use them. The elastic closure, though, is quite important. I do like to have my notebook closed. I also have a tendency to have little like slips of paper that I've stuck in there, not like in the back pocket, just slid into the notebook. And by having the elastic closure, it keeps the notebook closed enough so that those things don't fall out.
That's a really good point there. Yeah, I don't know that I that could be make or break for me, to be honest with you, but I definitely think the page ribbons, I do use those, and I agree with you. Devastation when they fall out. Sometimes I don't even know how they fall out. Clearly, it's getting stuck on something and ripping out. One of the things I am a big fan of in the bullet journal notebooks is that they have 3 of them in there, and I really like that because I tend to use a lot of them, because usually I'll have one of the page holders on like my current page, and then because I'm using my bullet journal at work, I'm using it for a lot of like, what's my next meeting, to easily get to that. And then I'll also have like the third one, not always in my future log, but maybe like a monthly overview or a tracker page is like almost like consistent for that month. And I also really like that they don't add charms to their page holders as well, because I know that while some people love that, I just really don't like it. And it also gives something else to like grab onto something, like if it's going to hook onto your leg or whatever, a solid piece of ribbon isn't likely going to do that unless you have like, I don't know, super strong leg grips. But otherwise, if you get a little charm hooked onto something, it's definitely pulling out.
Yeah, no, I find that those ones do have a tendency to fall out more often than the ones that don't have a charm. I quite like the charm. I think it's cute, but I also wish that the charms would match like the theme of the notebook. And I understand it's a branding thing. Like, I get it. But I just think it would be kind of cute if like, you have your snowflake journal with a little snowflake charm or something like that. I think that would be kind of cool. It would be a lot more, I don't know, effort, cost, that kind of stuff, but
it definitely costs. So I don't know that I talked about it in my video or not, but I tried to change the charm for the notebook that I did for the March notebook, because I had talked before about not thinking that the ampersand was like super professional, like having a charm like that. So what I wanted to do was to replace it and do a flat version of like what's on the end of a shoestring, right? So like that it doesn't fray, but it would have been flat. And I asked them if they would like have hammer stamped, metal stamped the ampersand into like the flat rectangle. I don't know if I'm describing that the right way or not, but that's what I had asked for. And I remember going back and forth. They were like, well, that's a lot of money and all of these things. And then we were going to go for it, but then we ran out of time. And I was like, but use it on something though. Like, I think that would be so cool, because it is. If you're not a fan of that ampersand, I think you could do like a metal cap, essentially, is what it would be on the end, and still have the branding on it. But I personally just feel like it would have a very different feeling to it. And I also feel like it would be slightly more professional. Again, if you're a place of business and you still want to use your Arch and Olive notebooks because it's the best one out there for you because of all the cool covers and the paper, and you get your marked notebook and it has page numbers in it, you don't necessarily want a dangly ampersand. I'd rather just have a flat stamped piece of metal, personally.
Oh, that's fair. I mean, that's the thing. These are all kind of personal preference type things, because I would never even think that it was a not professional thing. Quote, quote, quote. Mad quotation marks everywhere here. But I find that having a charm on the end of it does make the tactile feeling of the bookmark nicer because it weighs the bookmark down. So it actually kind of feels like it's, being pulled to the end of the page. I feel like I'm explaining this poorly. Hopefully you kind of get what I mean.
I definitely understand what you're saying. I see the value in that, like you're saying that, because it's not just kind of migrating on its own because it doesn't have a weight. If you're really going to hold it on your page, let it hold it down. I get it.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a kind of like an anchor. It'd be really cute if there was a little anchor on one of them, just saying. But I find that one of the issues that I've had previously in some notebooks is actually just the bookmarks not being long enough. Like, literally, they did not poke out the bottom of the page. Like, you'd put them onto the page, and there's nothing to grab onto to actually flip to that page. I'm like, your bookmark is literally pointless. Why is it here?
There is no point to a bookmark that you can't. That's the whole idea is take it, lift it, get to your page easily. I'd have to like fish through the top of my notebook to find out where that ribbon is.
So that is definitely something that I check anytime I go to look at a new notebook, like in particular one that I have received. It's kind of hard to see these things online, like before you purchase them. But yeah, in terms of your next consideration though, what would be another make or break kind of thing for your notebooks?
Yeah. So again, as I've gotten to know more brands out there and see kind of what is out there when it comes to notebook and stationery, something that's really important to me now, a lot more now than maybe it was several years ago when I started, is the brand that I'm buying it from and very much aligning myself with it. Maybe not 100% because I know not every brand is going to do everything that you like. And I think if they're doing something that you don't like, you have to make that moral decision on whether or not you align to that. But for the most part, if they're out there and they very much align with just like your design style or your aesthetic, or especially if they're a small business and you want to support someone like that, I think it's really cool. Like, for instance, there is a creator, Lila Journals, who has been in the journal community for a very long time. And she started to make her own notebooks. I mean, she just released them. Not that they're exactly my aesthetic, but like they are really cool looking.
Oh my gosh, they are so beautiful. Like, I came across a reading journal video that somebody put up on YouTube or whatever, and they showing off the notebook at the start of the video, and I'm just like, no, shut up. I don't care about what you're doing today. I just need to know where this notebook is from because she's done such a beautiful job designing them. In particular, it was one that had like this kind of very intricate framing and it had like a ribbon or something. And like you said, it's not necessarily my style or typical style, but I was very tempted. Absolutely gorgeous. She's also one of the people that I think has been doing one of those fluffy covers. I think she has a fluffy cover now.
Yeah, hers are all very cutesy, right? I don't know if that's how I exactly say it, but they are very aesthetic. They're very beautiful.
Very demure, very mindful.
Yeah, exactly that. And they just very much align with her as a brand. It's like, if I'm going to purchase this notebook from you, I know exactly what I'm going to get. And I think, even someone like Amanda Rach Lee, who does have a fluffy notebook, let's just go ahead and just say that's the fluffy notebook that at least I was thinking of when I saw it, because it's the only fluffy notebook I've ever seen. But that is something too. When you're buying that from her, you're like, oh, this absolutely fits with her whole vibe. You know exactly what you're getting from that. And that's how I feel with the other brands that I'm purchasing from. Sometimes they will explore, but I feel like when Archer and Olive explores, it's still an Archer and Olive notebook. All of those core features of the notebook are there. They're exploring things within their cover usually, right? That's where they feel like they play the most. And then you have someone like Bullet Journal, and I'm only naming these because these are the ones I buy or get the most, right? But they, for the most part, were always very straightforward. They were a color of the year. And then even them now, though, they're starting to play around a little bit with different creators and making those. I think the last one last year had more of a botanical flower or something on it. And then the one this year is like a foiled star pattern that they have on there. And even with that one, I'm a little funny about, like, because again, I wouldn't normally expect that from Bullet Journal because everything before this has been very minimal and very just a color. But I am okay with the fact that they're exploring and doing a little bit more with that, because I also think from a brand perspective, and I very much respect this, having worked in marketing and digital marketing and a little bit of product marketing back in the day, you want to invite more people into your brand. They benefit more if people start to go that. So if you like this cool star foil look and you're not just about the basic boring flat style that has been there before, you do start to invite more people into your brand. And again, on the opposite side, I feel like Archer and Olive, it's not just because I've been yelling about it for years, but they have put out less flowery kind of covers, and that I can very much align with that and be like, yeah, I'm going to buy that notebook now because it is something that I want to have.
I think that the nice part about the bullet journal notebooks as well is just that you know internally what you're going to get. You're always going to get those elements that are very bullet journal esque. You're going to get, like, you know, your grid spacing guide, you're going to get the overlapping circles for their branding, you're going to get the little reference booklet that tells you like how to bullet journal and stuff, because they have designed their notebook so it is specifically for bullet journaling. Mm-hmm. That's not to say that you can't use it for other stuff. Like, you can put whatever you want in a notebook. We're not like the notebook police or anything. But in terms of internally, you know what you're getting. It's just that outside packaging that's changing up a little. I think that the holographic foiling is so beautiful, but I'm not going to use the paper. I can't. I'm not going to use it.
You're like, can I take off the cover of this notebook, put other paper inside of it? So I know people do that with Archer and Olive notebooks. I've had people offer it to me before because I was like, I really love this cover, but it has lined paper in it. I remember someone was like, I do this for a living. I cut out books and redo whatever. And I was like, I like it, but I'm not going to pay someone to rebind my notebook for me.
Yeah, like some Bujo surgery type deal. Like, I'm not gonna do it. I'd like to just have an all-in-one type thing of all the stuff that I like together. But I did like your point about, in terms of selecting your brands, you know, that you're going to support and whatever, thinking about the kind of maybe like mission or morals behind those brands. Like, you know, what is it that those brands stand for and what do they support type of a thing. Because although it might not necessarily be like a conscious choice when you're going to buy these things, by putting, you know, your money into that brand, you are in some way supporting what they stand for, if that kind of makes sense. Like, I'm not saying that, like, oh, you know, if you go and pick the wrong notebook brand to support, you're like a terrible person or anything like that. No, it's just, you know, drawing our own personal lines in terms of what we are okay with spending our money on versus not when it comes to what brands kind of stand for. If that kind of makes sense.
It does. I think some areas where it starts to get a little bit shady, and I've seen this a handful of times, where other brands will copy kind of a look of a different one. And it's always hard, I personally feel like, to point to certain things, right? But I know that there are brands that have kind of copy or duped what Archer and Olive has done. But I also feel like you can't be like, I have a copyright over putting a little icon in the top center of my notebook. Right? There are a million different versions. I remember years ago, there was like the bee icon they had. There was another brand that did another bee that looked similar. It wasn't exact, but that was like a thing. I think now too, there's this whole conversation around like AI art and other things like that start to come into the picture too, where there's a lot of people, especially in the artist creative community, that is very much against AI art and creation. And they are basically like, I want nothing to do with that because that's not supporting other artists, or it's stealing from other artists to make its own thing. That's just another area too, where it's like, if a brand was to start to do that, you would just make that decision on whether or not you like the look of the cover. And if you're really hardcore pressed about not supporting AI art, but I agree, I wouldn't hold that against somebody and be like, I'm unfollowing you because you bought a notebook from this company. I don't know. Are there other ones you can think of, Jess? And again, we don't have to like call out specific names, but I'm sure the Planner Pals would love us to, because y'all love some tea, that have maybe kind of been on there. There was a notebook years ago, I think, that a lot of people like just turned against, but I can't remember the name of the brand.
No, I know that we've had previously brands using user-created content in their advertising without permission. That's been an issue. We have had, like, I don't know, I keep wanting to say scrap lifting, but I think that that's like the nice term for it. It's not shoplifting. The idea of, like, you know, stealing or mimicking designs, obviously. The one that kind of gets me, which is like, it's a weird pet peeve, but like it's still there, is when a brand puts out notebook designs without kind of suggesting that they weren't actually designed in-house. Like, not to say that everything has to be designed in-house, because you do have people or like brands that, you know, work with creators, do collaborations, make kind of like creator-led notebooks and all of that kind of stuff. But typically speaking, when they do that, they put the person's name on it, because that's also a way to, like, you know, market or advertise and stuff like that. But it's more so when I think companies are like marketing the notebook as like a, hey, this is like our notebook, but actually it's just like a generic one that they've gotten off Alibaba without any kind of like design input or whatever. It's just kind of like a stock standard one that they've purchased off that website and now are reselling under their own name. That always makes me feel a little strange. And that's not to say that the notebook isn't good quality. That's not to say that the notebook can't be like, exactly what you're looking for. It just feels weird to say like, I got this notebook from X, but actually it came from Y and it's being drop shipped and a whole bunch of other brands have it as well.
Yeah, I think is it called white labeling? I know they some brands do that where it's like you have a general thing, but then you're just putting your own brand name on it. But I think the planner notebook community, like we're very aware of those type of things. Like I said, the fact that a community would go against another brand because it's like you swipe this from this company because it looks exactly like that. There are definitely some specific items, ways things are produced, like you said, the insides of a notebook that are similar to others. I mean, I'll go ahead out and just say, like, I was very inspired by other notebooks when I was designing the one with Archer and Olive, like the page marks or the smart marks that I call them on the bottom. That is not an idea of my own. The way that I put them on there, though, is like other brands do that as well. But I thought let's integrate it into the actual grid versus it being outside of. Like, again, not a new idea, but something that I find very helpful. But I think things like that, there aren't any brands I think that where it was like, this is us. You can't find this anywhere else, because I know for a fact other brands have been doing that. But there are some of those qualities, though, like you just mentioned, that you very much look for and you kind of know, especially if you are a connoisseur of notebooks.
Connoisseur notebooks. There's a nicer way of saying a hoarder. I think that another consideration that I know that I would personally have if I didn't get sent as much from brands and stuff would just be price, honestly. Because while there are some very beautiful notebooks out there, they are kind of a pricey item a lot of the time. So I can totally understand people who are getting these notebooks that are, these white label, whatever ones, because they have all the features that they want at a much lower price. So like totally fair. I know that like BUKE, I think they are ones that like 160 GSM, bright white dot grid pages, elastic closure, all the stuff that I'm looking for, but at a much cheaper price because they are kind of like those mass-produced, sold to many companies type notebooks. I'd be curious to try it actually, because I think that it would be possibly a really good notebook for people who do want 160 GSM but don't want to pay like 35 US dollars or more at some of these like larger brands.
It's something that I did think about early on. I remember when I bought the very first LT 1917, I felt like I was splurging. And I think that notebook was maybe $20 or $25. But at that point in time, I could not comprehend why a notebook would cost more money than like $7 or $8. But then after using different ones, because I used the LTs for like my first two, and then the third one, I went to Walmart and I was like, I'm getting this notebook. It's $7. It was the worst notebook ever that I've ever used. Talk about hating ghosting and getting the ick. Like that was toilet paper, I think, on there. But as you start to realize that so much goes into that, you do enjoy kind of the artistry of it. I look at it very similar to fountain pens, right? There's a lot of people out there who will be like, oh, I would never pay more than $8 for a fountain pen. I just bought a fountain pen the other day that was over $200. But the difference is that it is custom made. I know the person who's making it. I've watched the entire process go through. He's a small creator. Gravitas Pens is where I bought it from. Just might as well shout him out because I love him so much. But I really felt that it was worth every penny because I know what had gone into the making of that. And I have a completely different respect for that versus other companies who are selling fountain pens. I'm going to get myself in trouble on this one, that definitely are not custom made for them. And they are just purchasing them generically, don't hate me, off of wherever and then selling them, as kind of that white label deal. I get it. You don't have to love everything about a brand.
I know, right? I was just like, I'm surprised that it didn't come up. The feathering. Oh my god. The heebie jeebie X. No.
Well, before we get ourselves in any more trouble, Jess, I think that we could say to our planner pals, we would love to hear from you and let us know what are your must-haves, your make or break it's for the notebooks and the planners that you're looking for. And I say planners because there are a lot of other predated or undated planners out there from different companies that we know our planner pals are using. We know it's not just bullet journal and blank dot grid notebooks. While we have an affinity for those, We want to hear about all the different types of planners and things that you're using. So let us know down in the comments of this video. Let us know in the comments of the podcast. You can also email us. We got some emails last time, Jess, and I felt like it was a personal one-to-one note for us. But you can email us, plannerpalspodcast@gmail.com. And of course, drop comments over on Instagram at Planner Pals Podcast.
I'm very interested to hear what other people have to say about their make or breaks and must-haves, because obviously, like, I'm just surprised Mark didn't mention page numbers. Yes, I know they're a nice to have, not a make or break, but still.
Yeah, if this was a different type of video, I would have harped on that forever. But you know what? If you want all of my make or breaks plus page numbers, go buy the rest of the notebooks over at Archilal for the marked notebooks, because I wanted them to sell out.
They will. I had somebody hit me up the other day being like, oh my god, that one's beautiful. Where did you get it from? I'm like, haha, well, that's actually a Mark Your Pages original type deal. But it's still very cool that you got to work with them and make something that's like, it's like your baby. It's like, you tailored the items and pieces of a notebook that you were like, wanted. Your nice to haves are now like haves because they're in that. I'm very eager to see your New Year setup.
So in our next episode, we are going to have even more fun talking about planners and notebooks and just the planning community as a whole, because we are going to come up with our 2025 planner trend predictions. I don't know how good I'm going to be at this, Jess, because I'm not really good at like thinking beyond a week from now, but we'll have fun with this episode. I'm really pumped up about it because I've never done this before.
Yeah, it's just going to be us spouting a whole bunch of honestly bullshit and slander about what the journal community is going to be doing next year, but I'm for it. I'm so excited. If you have any predictions that you think might be up on the horizon, let us know about those. But for now, team, thank you for watching.